A couple of weeks ago, the Ukrainian armed forces struck early warning advanced radar systems, nuclear weapons radar systems, early warning for Russia deep into Russian territory. And at the time, it got a little bit of notice here in the West, but not as much as you might think. But as according to our guest today, it was a really dumb idea. And we have MIT professor Ted Postol back with us today. As always, one of the growing favorites on our show here because he brings such clarity and such knowledge that you just don't get anywhere else. And it's always a treat for us to have you on there. And welcome back to the show, Professor.
Well, it's nice to be back here, although I have to say I'm not so happy as to why I'm back here, but we can talk about that.
Yeah. That's kind of one of the issues we have rolling around with a lot of the stuff we have is that some of the information may not be that great, but I promise you, though, why it is vital and necessary for our audience to see that, for other people to be able to see it, because they don't get this kind of information elsewhere. If all they see what's on the mainstream media, they just may yawn about a lot of this stuff. So that's why it's so vital to have you on here. So we're really grateful to that. I want to set it up because you had an article, and I'll get to it in just a minute, in Responsible Statecraft, but I kind of want to set it up for people so they understand the significance of what this is. So, of course, yesterday was the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion, 6th June 1944. All kinds of celebrations were had on the soil in the Normandy beachhead in the northern part of France. And John Kirby, spokesman for the White House, was there and was talking with some Fox News reporters. And he made some very interesting comments about the situation in the other war that is currently going on between Russia and Ukraine. Watch this one first.
I think we can all agree, especially people that love Ukraine and want to see Ukraine succeed, that an escalation of this conflict to really become potentially World War III, to become the U.S. versus Russia, which Putin already thinks it is, could be not only disastrous for the Ukrainian people, but disastrous for people all across Europe.
Okay, so now get ready because it's going to be kind of a yo-yo here. So first of all, he's making some sense because it would be disastrous if this thing escalated, this war escalated into even a regional conflict, much less a global conflict between Russia and the United States, or Russia and NATO, all these four, and it would be bad for Ukraine. He was right on that. But he also said one other thing which was really instructive, and he said, because we don't want this to go to World War III, which Vladimir Putin thinks we're on the cusp of. And that is so important to what we're going to talk about today.
Yes, but Vladimir Putin has reason to be concerned because we, the Americans, attacked this vital early warning radar that could result in an accident, as I'll explain later, that could have led to or could eventually lead to nuclear weapons use by Russia. That is to say, we instigated it. Not Mr. Putin.
So. Yeah, and Gary, if you can go ahead and bring that headline up there from Responsible Statecraft. You published an article a few days ago saying that droning Russia's nuke radars is the dumbest thing Ukraine can do. Now, it would almost seem that it would be self-evident. It certainly is in most of the Western media that when Ukraine struck those two radar installations, that it was supposed to be something good for the Ukraine side, that it was supposed to be bad for the Russian side, that was going to diminish their ability to conduct war and maybe give Ukraine a chance to win. But it seems that it's backfired, and as you imply here, and I wonder if you can explain why that is.
Well, this is part of a Russian early warning system that has significant technical limitations. The early warning radars have very limited fields of view simply because radars look in a straight line. And I'll show you later, and we'll have some diagrams, that because of the curvature of the Earth, the range of these radars is much shorter than what most people wrongly think they are. And even more important than that is Russia, for technical reasons that I can go into in some other, in some other forum, or even now. Russia does not have space-based satellite systems that can look directly down at the Earth like we do. And so, for example, if you had if the Russians had space-based early warning systems, and there was a launch against, let's say, Moscow along a particular radar corridor, because each radar looks at a corridor, uh, the Russians would know about it essentially when the launch occurred, when the attacking missiles broke water from the submarine, and that would give them significantly more time, because it would take quite a significant amount of time for the ballistic missiles to fly to an altitude where they passed through the search fan of the radars. So the lack of a space-based early warning system is an extremely dangerous shortfall in the Russian early warning system. In addition, the fact that they would not have what I would call global surveillance, which a space-based early warning system would give them, would allow them to quickly see that nothing else was happening in other radar corridors. So they could immediately become informed about whether or not what they are seeing is part of a coordinated attack aimed at really destroying Russian leadership and its missile forces, or if it's just an isolated launch and may have nothing to do, maybe an accident, or may have nothing to do with the coordinated attack. So lacking this system and then attacking the radars that give them such limited warning is just like tickling the tiger's tail. I mean, I don't understand why anyone who has any understanding of what they're doing would do such a thing.
Yeah, and as it turns out, that's not the only thing we're doing. So this continues on. I said this: the Kirby comments from yesterday was kind of like a yo-yo. So first of all, he properly said that we don't want World War III. We don't want this to escalate. It would be bad for us and for Ukraine. Then he talks about how we're escalating this. Check this out.
Right now, there's no change in our policy about the use of ATACMS, a long-range strike missile of 300 kilometers or so, for use inside Russia. And again, I want to remind, the guidance we've given the Ukrainians is to go after things that are an imminent threat just over that border. Again, will we have to talk to them about what that looks like going forward? Probably so, but that's the guidance they've been given right now.
And so he says none of our policies have changed. In case anybody had missed it, here's what the president himself said is the policy regarding this. Check this out.
Let me ask you about what Vladimir Putin said last night about this authorization of American weapons inside Russia. He said the supply of high-precision weapons to Ukraine for strikes on Russian territory is direct participation in this war. He went on to say that this is the way to serious problems, and again talked about Russia's nuclear capabilities. Does that concern you?
I've known him for over 40 years. He's concerned me for 40 years. He's not a decent man. He's a dictator, and he's struggling to make sure he holds this country together while still keeping this assault going. We're not talking about giving them weapons to strike Moscow, to strike the Kremlin, to strike just across the border where they're receiving significant fire from conventional weapons used by the Russians to go into Ukraine to kill Ukrainians.
Okay, he's talking about just going over the border. Okay, that's typically stuff that you would have regular artillery for, not ATACMS, which is long range by the definition there. So, I mean, the chances that Ukraine is going to have that capability and limit it to only that is really suspect anyway. But if you're, again, like you said for a minute ago, looking at this from the Russian side of the equation here, they're not going to say, okay, well, that's cool. If you just want to attack my territory with American weapons a little bit into my border, that's fine, especially when they see they've already attacked these radars with Ukrainian drones, which, as I understand, and tell me if you know anything on this, was actually Western technology, not something that Ukraine side produced. So how do you think this is looking from the Russian side?
Well, if I were Russian, what I would be saying, I just think it's pretty clear what it is. I would be saying that the Americans are attacking me by arming this proxy of theirs, and if they're going to go about arming a proxy, to attack me, because I would see it as the Americans being the source of the threat. Well, maybe I should arm the Houthis so they could be my proxy and to attack American naval ships, off Yemen. Why not? I mean, if you're going to play the game of arming a street gang in my neighborhood that then goes around shooting up my kids on the street, then and there's no one responsible intervening. Well, maybe if I want to retaliate, I'll go and give weapons to a street gang on your street and let them shoot up your kids. So I think this is the logic here is ridiculous. And let me make another statement, because I'm an American citizen and I don't like an American president making personal insults against any leader. It's if I choose to do it, I think it borders on improper. But if I'm a president, I would never make these personal attacks on another foreign leader. And if there's a foreign leader who deserves the personal attacks that Biden stated, it's Mr. Zelensky. Zelensky is effectively a dictator. He suppressed all alternative discussion in Ukraine about coming to some kind of ceasefire agreement. They're picking people off the street against their will. They're not training them, and they're sending them out to be murdered in a battlefield environment that even a very, very skilled soldier could have a difficult time surviving in. He's murdering his own people on a large scale. And I don't understand why Mr. Biden somehow wants to portray this monster, which in my view he is, as a great democratic leader. It's just, to me, it raises questions for me about his understanding of the world.
Well, we're actually we got some video we can show you that's going to address that issue later on. But Gary, do we have that one from 5 June? Is that the one from Vladimir Putin? Is that something you got available? Okay, it's going to come up. So you were just said, Professor, that if you were on the Russian side, and because America was doing what Kirby was talking about there, that you might do something like arm our enemies or arm the enemies of our side. Well, it turns out,
want to play proxy war? I can play proxy war, right?
Right.
You want to use the other argument? Fine.
Putin did
Let's
say
use
that.
it.
Okay, so check this out. Here's how Putin actually said it 2 days ago.
Мы думаем на тему о том, что если кто-то считает возможным поставлять такое оружие в зону боевых действий для нанесения ударов по нашей территории и создания проблем для нас, то почему у нас нет права поставлять наше оружие такого же класса в те регионы мира, где будут наноситься удары по чувствительным объектам тех стран, которые делают это в отношении России?
Okay, so whether it's hitting those advanced radars or these ATACMS that have been used to the Russian side, the HIMARS systems that were used in this Russian city of Belgorod about a week or so ago, I mean, you see these things are having an effect on the Russian side. Now, he's claimed to do that. That was 2 days ago, so we haven't seen any of that thing happen yet, but we can only imagine that the wheels are in movement on that, and that there could be American assets or British assets or NATO assets elsewhere that could be imminent to be hit. Do you think that's a real possibility?
Yes, it is. And I might add that these artillery attacks on Belgorod have been happening for months and months and months, more than that. And that's a war crime, because when you're attacking the downtown area of Belgorod, it's got no military utility. And they were doing it in Donetsk too. And it's now tapering off in Belgorod, in part because the Russians have pushed the Ukrainians back far enough that they don't have artillery locations that can easily reach Belgorod. So what they effectively did is invited the Russians to create a battle zone in the north of Ukraine to take territory away from the Ukrainians where they could attack Belgorod. So I don't quite understand, how an individual who claims that they're informed about this kind of the war situation could make these statements. Either he's out of touch, or he's lying, and neither, whatever it is, or if it's even both, it's just not very. It's very disconcerting to me to see this
Yeah,
kind of
it really
behavior
is.
from an American leader.
And I'm gonna, before we get back to your article, because that's what I want to center on here. I want to show our audience one more thing to kind of reinforce, I think, what's driving your contention that this is the dumbest thing that we could have done. Because we're going to back up, first of all, to February 29th, when Putin went on to talk about how, look, you talk about, because at that time there was talk about the West intervening, whether it's with ground troops or with providing weapons. It hadn't happened at that point. But Putin went out on a public address and explained what the situation looks like to him at that time. Check this out.
They must ultimately understand that we also have weapons, and they know about it. Just as I said, we also have weapons that can hit targets on their territory. All of this really threatens conflict with the use of nuclear weapons, and therefore the destruction of civilization. Don't they understand this?
Don't they understand that? That always stood out to me, because he very clearly saying, and he has said in other forums, that going to fight in a nuclear war, there will be no winners. No one can win. And he kind of reinforced it here in saying, don't they understand this? i.e., don't cross that line coming in. But then we hit those radars subsequent to that video there. And just yesterday, he ramped it up one notch higher.
Американцы — единственная страна, Соединенные Штаты, которая использовала ядерное оружие во Второй мировой войне. Хиросима, Нагасаки — 20 килотонн. Наше тактическое ядерное оружие — 70-75 килотонн. Это такое ядерное тактическое оружие. Давайте не доводить не только до использования, а даже до угрозы использования. На Западе считают, что Россия никогда этого не использует. У нас же есть ядерная доктрина. Посмотрите, что написано. Если чьи-то действия будут угрожать нашему суверенитету и территориальной целостности, мы считаем для себя возможным использовать все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Нельзя относиться к этому легко, поверхностно. Нужно относиться профессионально.
Now, in that clip there, he expressly said that he was willing to use them. It is in our doctrine. And I know in the previous time you were on, when he talks about a 70 kiloton weapon as a tactical nuclear, which is more than 3 times bigger than what we used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I saw certainty in his face and conviction that he would use that. So first of all, do you really believe that he means that? And then I'm guessing that you probably do, which is why you wrote that article.
I'm sure he means it. And, the article I wrote, I should point out, the original article I wrote about, the discussion we had, I think in the last deep dive, was about a 1 kiloton nuclear weapon, and that did quite a lot of damage. But 75 kiloton nuclear weapon against military forces would be horrendous. I mean, you could destroy a significant city with a single 75 kiloton nuclear weapon. So, it would set fires 3 miles. It would set an area of 30 or 40 square miles on fire, because the flash from the weapon would be able to set fires at great range relative to the nuclear weapon itself. So, this is not a minor use of nuclear weapons. I'm a little surprised, but I believe he knows what he's doing, and I believe he doesn't bluff. I think he knows what he's talking about. I'm a little surprised that he's talking about such a large nuclear weapon, but if that's what they're thinking about, so be it. So 75 kiloton nuclear weapon is just a significant nuclear weapon, very significant.
Yeah. So given all that, let's return back to the hitting the radar situation. Now, many people in the West, even if they were aware of it, because some of the Western media mentioned that it happened, but just kind of in passing, they didn't really give much significance to it. If you could please explain to us why you think that the Ukraine side hitting those radars was such a big deal, and why that could possibly have been part of the reason why Putin made the discussion or the statement he did yesterday as to why he is serious with this. What does this look like from the Russian side?
Well, from the Russian side, they know that we know they don't have a space-based early warning system. They know that. The reason they know that is because I inadvertently discovered it after a 1996 accidental alert. And that's a whole interesting story by itself. But it's been confirmed many times to me, and we are absolutely sure that they still have not developed the what's called look-down capability to have global early warning from space.
Well, if I could, Professor, I mean, let's just go past that, because there may be a lot of people that don't know what happened in 1996. Could you just briefly tell us?
Well, briefly, what happened is there was a sounding rocket that was launched by a group of scientists. Incidentally, I've been in contact with some of the people on that project. We've talked, and I've given talks to them, so they have a better understanding of what happened. And it went to a very high altitude, about 11,000 kilometers, which is unusually high for a sounding rocket. It had never been. It was launched.
And I'm sorry, was that American scientist or Russian scientist?
It was an American team.
Okay.
That was working in cooperation with the Norwegian government, and it was launched from an island in Ndoya Island on the northwest coast of Norway, off the northwest coast of Norway. And it was on a near vertical trajectory, although it was going to go hundreds of kilometers, basically toward the North Pole. And in fact, why don't we just take a second here and Gary, could you go to slide 33? There you go. Now, what this shows is this shows the trajectory of the rocket. You could see it was going toward the North Pole. The objective was to get to a high altitude of about 11,000 kilometers and take measurements of the ionosphere. Scientists just doing their work. But what happened is, we now know why, this went right through the early warning fan of a radar that was on Murmansk looking north into the United States. So if you look at the next slide, 34, you could see that the radar fan, which is shown there in yellow, which saw this thing rising to a high altitude right in the middle of the attack corridor from Grand Forks, North Dakota, United States, to Moscow. Now, the real concern was that this was a rocket, a hostile rocket. They didn't know that it was a sounding rocket, and what they were worried about was the possibility that this was going to explode at high altitudes and blind the radar in preparation for a nuclear attack that was following from the North Atlantic. And so the timing of the attack would first blind the radar, and then missiles would have already been launched that had not yet broken the radar fan because they were below the Earth horizon because of the curved Earth, and that these missiles would be timed to just break the radar fan when it was just blinded. Now, when this happened, I said to myself, how could they have thought they were under attack? If they had a space-based early warning system, they would have looked with their system at the North Atlantic, and they would have seen that nothing was happening in the North Atlantic. And I had many conversations with very well, including the Victor Yesen, who was the officer who was in charge at the time of the accidental launch warning. He was the commander of the Strategic Rocket Forces, the Russian, and I've seen him multiple times at Stanford when he has visited the United States. So he's a man fortunately, of great intellect and very calm, and he's trained as an engineer. You know, he's not a drunken fool like people stupidly try to portray the Russians to be. And very fortunately, he was in charge. And he looked at the situation and he said, we don't know what's happening because we have no idea if there's an attack underway, but it seems implausible, and I'm going to wait. And he waited till the rocket reached the highest altitude it was going to get to, where he was holding his breath, or assuming, he didn't tell me, said, where I assume he was holding his breath, wondering if it was going to explode, blinding his radars. But instead, it just started falling back toward the Earth. And when that happened, he called the alert off, and a perfectly appropriate thing to do. But that was because he couldn't tell what was going on in the North Atlantic. If he knew what was going on in the North Atlantic, like we would have known if we had a similar situation, nothing would have happened. There would have been no alert at all. So,
and I wonder if you can address one thing, because I mean, certainly we know Russia has plenty of satellites in the air, and I wonder if you can explain why it is that those satellites that they do have are not useful for this early warning system.
See, in order to get very good coverage of the Earth with existing satellites, you need to be able to look straight down at the Earth to see what's happening. So if you'll go to slide 54, 14, 14, you'll see a depiction of our, rough cartoon of what our satellites do. We look straight down at the Earth. Now, the reason we can do that is sort of illustrated in slide 13, immediately before 14. When we look down into the Earth, we're looking into square areas, roughly square areas. And there are tremendous bright reflections of sunlight from clouds and the Earth below. The energy from that sunlight is enormous, and it's very difficult to see the small signal from the exhaust plume of even a very large missile. So what we have to do is we have to look at multiple times and subtract the signals from each other and look for the difference between the signals. The difference would tell us there's something else in the signal, like a rocket in flight. Well, in order to do that, you need extremely stable infrared sensors. In other words, the sensor better tell you the exact intensity each time you look, not from something that's going on internally. You need a lot of electronics to be able to subtract the backgrounds, and you need a lot of sensors because you need to look into a small area with each sensor. And the Russians, for reasons that I still do not know, although I have speculation that's, I think, reasonable, but certainly not, I do not know, have not been able to develop this combination of very specialized technologies. But just to give you a sense of how dramatically it affects their capabilities, if we look at slide 15, which what satellite 1.5 shows you are the areas that we can globally monitor with those 3 satellites. And if you look in the middle left corner, you can see a little red circle, and that shows you the area that the Russians can observe, can monitor with 9 satellites in extremely eccentric orbits, in what are called Molniya orbits. So the Russians do have a very limited space-based system that can see the U.S. ICBM fields only. It cannot see everything else. So it's really almost useless, because the biggest threat that Russia faces are the most accurate, capable missiles the United States has, which are Trident ballistic missiles. And so they have a very, very serious vulnerability. Now, in order to look at that little red satellite system, they don't need 3 satellites, which allow us to look at almost the whole world. They need 9 satellites in staggered orbits. Let me just give you a sense of that. They launched their satellites into very eccentric orbits. And so if we look at slide 26, you could see 9 satellites are labeled here on what's called a Molniya orbit. They're very eccentric orbits, and they look at a glancing angle at the ICBM fields in the United States. And you must have 9. These satellites are semi-synchronous. They take 12 hours to make a full circle of the Earth, and only one of them is in a position to see the field, the ICBM fields, for about 2.5 hours. So you need 9 satellites in order to always cover the fields. Now, when I first discovered this problem, well, there were 9 satellites in orbit, but now there are only 4 satellites in orbit. So the Russians can only see U.S. ICBM fields about 45% of the time. So,
Ted, I wonder if you could answer a question. One of our viewers is saying in that diagram right there, that satellite number 6 seems so close to the Earth over there, and wonder if you can explain why that one is, and say number 1 in that diagram is so far.
Because the satellite number 6, it cannot view a large area of the Earth at a glancing angle. It's so close to the Earth. The satellite has to be far away, like 40,000 kilometers, to get this nice glancing geometry that allows it to see a glancing area. Let me, if you look at slide 20, this slide is what the Earth looks like from the apogee, from position 1. And the red rectangular area shows the area that can be seen, from this enormous altitude, looking at a glancing angle. If we get to a much lower altitude, you couldn't look at a large area at a glancing angle. And if you looked at it, you would only be looking at it for a very short interval of time, because the area you would be looking at a glancing angle would be moving very fast.
And I'm sorry if I'm exposing my lack of
space
knowledge, but why would it be that close? Why wouldn't they make it go further back so it could see more?
Well, it's in a 12-hour orbit. If it were in a higher altitude orbit, it would be at a higher altitude for a longer period of time. But you would still have to deploy many satellites in a constellation. And my guess, I don't have a clear answer to your question. My guess is that when they sat down and did all the engineering assessments and geometrical considerations and the considerations for the launch costs of these satellites, because you go to a more eccentric orbit, it costs more to launch the satellite. that they settled on the 12-hour Molniya orbits. That's my guess, but I don't know for sure. I'd have to
No.
do a.
We just know that's what they did. We don't, I guess, know
Yeah,
for sure
we
why.
yeah. It's
Now, I
it's
wonder if
knowable,
now that you've really established that it's the space base they don't have and they have limitations, I wonder if you can get back to your primary contention that hitting those radars is a bigger deal than we may think it is, and how does that make Russia more vulnerable, and how might that react or relate to Putin saying he's willing to use tactical nuclear weapons?
Well, let's imagine. Let's go to a slide numeral 3. Slide numeral 3 shows the early warning fans of the radars looking south. So this doesn't show all the radars. There are 10 radars that are looking in all kinds of different directions in Russia to give them early warning from 360 degrees of attack. Now, the two radars at Armavir are shown, the radar fans are shown for the two radars at Armavir. Those radar fans, I just chose a length, they're about 2,000 kilometers. The radars can see considerably further than that. But, for purposes of illustration, I just kept the fans at 2,000 kilometers. What you see below the fans is a search area on the ground. That's an area on the ground where a launch could occur, where the rockets from the launch area would eventually pass through the radar fan. If you look at the upper right corner of this particular slide, you'll see a yellow fan passing over a curved blue earth in the side view of a typical radar fan. And you can see that if you launched from below that fan, you would not see any object coming. You don't have over-the-horizon capability, as has been stated incorrectly in numerous articles. You look in a straight line, and so you only see this missile when it's passes through the radar fan. So if we go to slide numeral 8, we can see the geometry of the Armavir radar fan. It's shown in orange. And if you launched a Trident missile from the Indian Ocean, as shown in this diagram, you'd need about 6 minutes before, after you launched, before you began to see the upper rocket stages and the warheads from this incoming attack. If you had to use radars in Moscow, the radar fan from Moscow is shown in yellow, you would lose another 4 or 5 minutes of warning time. You'd be left with 7 or 8 minutes of warning before Moscow would disappear in a fireball, at least from your point of view. So this is not a good situation. Now, to make it clear, this is not the optimal trajectory radar fan to attack Moscow with. What happened in 1996 is you see in the next slide, slide number 9. That's the situation the Russians had looking in this case into the North Atlantic, and because it's possible to get very close to Russia in waters, North Sea and other places, you could attack on trajectories much closer. You could attack Moscow on trajectories much closer, and you could see that in that case, the Russians would have even less warning. So the radar corridor into the North Atlantic is the most sensitive area for the Russians from the point of view of early warning. Remember that they would not be able to see these missiles launched from the North Atlantic unless they had this wonderful space-based early warning system that we have. So I would say this is a very serious problem, and we know about it, and the Russians know we know about it, because I went to Moscow in 1996, a little concerned that I might be arrested, to be honest with you. And I gave a talk at Komieta. Komieta is the organization that builds the early warning satellites. And the reason I gave this talk is because I had determined, to my satisfaction, that the Russians did not have this space-based early warning capability. Now, I also understood that this particular lack of capability absolutely had to be one of the most closely held secrets by Russia. No question in my mind, knowing how military organizations will try to, this is a vulnerability. You're a military officer. You would never want an adversary to know that you were so vulnerable in this area. But
Right.
I had already.
That's exactly what I thought. That was, although it would have seemed from 1996 that they might have done something to fix that in between now and then. But whatever, they haven't, or at least it doesn't appear that they have.
They
and so the vulnerability remains.
They haven't been able to master this technology. I am surprised by this too.
Yeah. But we have what we have. And so that the problem for us right now, ironically, is because they haven't developed that makes them more vulnerable, which is not good for our side.
Right. If you're out in the field and you're commanding a battalion and you can disrupt the enemy's communications and catch the enemy in a situation where they're compromised, that's, perfectly sensible, good military situation to be in. But if you both have nuclear weapons and the destructive capability of your weapons means that both your countries are destroyed, it's not the same situation.
Right.
You can't conventionalize nuclear war. When people talk about winning nuclear war, they're ignoring the basic facts about nuclear weapons. Anyone who talks about winning nuclear war has no idea what they're talking about. It's not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of fact. They just do not know what they're talking about. It's
simple physics, really, which alarms me all the more. So on the same day that quote from Putin I showed you a second ago, where he's talking about his 75 kiloton nuclear weapons, his doctrine that he says we will use it if these thresholds are met here. On that same day, going back to Kirby, elsewhere in France, here's what he had to say.
We have to stand up to aggressors. You can't let them just change borders by force. And we have done that. And it's not just the United States. 50 some other nations have helped Ukraine try to beat back this aggression. And you're right about Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea. That is Ukrainian soil. And they have every right to claim that soil back. It's their country. And we want to make sure they have the tools to do that and the skills to do that. And we're going to continue to provide that kind of support.
So then President Biden agrees with the 1991 Ukraine territory.
Of course.
Okay. Let's just talk about what that means. So 1991 borders means driving Russia out of everywhere they are, out of Crimea, out of the Donbass, etc. Can you think, especially given what Putin said elsewhere on that same day, any scenario where Vladimir Putin is going to allow his troops to be driven out of Ukraine and not use those weapons?
Well, I mean, the man has to either be ignorant beyond belief, delusional beyond belief, or just simply a political liar. I assume he's a political liar because he has some military experience, although one wonders about what he really knows. But the war has been lost. Let me be very clear. There is no way that the West can win this war unless the Russians decide to lay down their weapons and walk away. It has to be a Russian decision, which there's no reason to believe they will take. They have destroyed a very large part of the Ukrainian army. The soldiers that are replacing the extraordinarily brave Ukrainian soldiers who have been slaughtered because because of the lack of thought and equipment, because the West didn't think this thing through, and Zelensky keeps sending them into combat situations where they have no chance of surviving. The new people they're using there are being murdered. They're just simply being murdered on the field. And for this guy to make these statements, he's either a political liar, which I think is certainly the most likely explanation, or he's just a delusional fool. He may be all of those. But I don't like to be rude about this, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of lives being lost. I mean, there's not a polite way to describe somebody who talks about the loss of those lives the way this man is doing.
And it's so ironic that
criminality.
The same guy who made that statement is the same guy who made the previous statement, the first one we showed, where he says it would be bad for Ukraine if this devolved into World War III. And yet he's describing a condition that would almost guarantee that outcome. That's what's so bizarre about it.
What is he worried about Ukraine for? It's bad for the world. What's he worried about Ukraine? How is Ukraine more important than the whole rest of the world? What is this guy talking about? I mean, if it's Monaco, it's bad for the world. If you have a nuclear war, global nuclear war over it. I mean, what is this guy talking about? I mean, he must have no comprehension of the most basic logic. What I think is going on, unfortunately, is Biden is up for re-election, and he's scared to death that the American public is going to finally understand at some point when the Russians, take the whole Black Sea coast, which I expect will likely happen, and when the Russians surround Kiev, which I think could happen any time because they have 300,000 fresh, well-equipped forces that have not yet been committed. So, to the campaign they're now winning. So, that could happen at any time. So my guess is that Biden and his crowd is scared to death that they're going to lose the election over this incredibly disastrous game that Biden started.
Here's the problem with that theory, though, Ted, is that if President Biden was primarily worried about getting reelected, and he was worried about if he knew the reality on the ground, then it seems he would be doing everything he could to keep things at a copacetic level, that he would not be threatening, adding new threats to the Russian side by allowing these strikes on the radars, for example, or by adding U.S. weapons firing into Ukraine, because that exacerbates and makes it less likely that he gets to November. But here's a clip. This is kind of something related to what you mentioned earlier in this episode here about how Biden is treating Zelensky and how those two hurt. Now, as I play this video clip here, note the contrast between how President Putin, when he was making his declarations that we showed there from 6 June, and what President Biden is saying, and just the imagery is just not good for our side.
You haven't bowed down. You haven't yielded at all. You continue to fight in a way that is just remarkable. Just remarkable. And we're not going to walk away from you. I apologize for those weeks of not knowing what's going to happen in terms of funding, because we had trouble getting the bill that we had to pass, that had the money in it, from some of our very conservative members who were holding it up. But we got it done finally, and since then, including today, I've announced 6 packages of significant funding. Today, I'm also signing an additional package for $225 million to help you reconstruct the electric grid. But once we got the national security bill passed, that was a political issue. we were able to get it all done. And the way you stood and holding on in Kharkiv, and you've proven once again the people of Ukraine cannot and will never be overtaken. And I assure you, the United States is going to stand with you. You've said that all during this debate. I continue to say it. The United States is standing with you. You are the bulwark against the aggression that's taking place. We have an obligation to be there. And so I'm looking forward to having a detailed discussion with you about where we go from here. But we're still in completely, thoroughly. Thank you.
I gotta add one thing. Gary just sent me a note here while we're watching. He said the guy sounds like he's talking from a hospital bed. And I thought he was going to fall asleep at one point, and it looked like even Zelensky was kind of going. I mean, that's the guy that's in charge of our side here that could potentially push Russia into a nuclear war. It's really alarming.
It is alarming. It is alarming. It's if he believes anything he said, it's totally delusional. If he believes anything, I'm hoping that the explanation is he's just trying to keep his own citizens from understanding what a bad situation he put the United States and NATO into, because this was an avoidable war, and he was involved in stopping the Turkish ceasefire agreement, and we stopped. The Ukrainians and the Russians had agreed to a reasonable ceasefire, and he was responsible for it. He was also responsible for not giving Russia any space with regard to, why did he have to go and threaten? I mean, look how threatening. If you were Putin and you had any doubts about whether you should have started the special military operation, you wouldn't at this point, because the Americans are using the Ukrainians as a proxy to attack your country. So this just confirms, at least if I were Putin, it would confirm my fear that Ukraine was going to be used as a platform for attacking Russia. I mean, we've shown that we are happy to do that and willing to do that. And then to lie.
Ted, one of the things I worry about in the near term is not whether or not we can get to November 5th for the election, and avoid any catastrophe, or whether the Ukraine side can hang on, but that based on what you said you would do if you were the Russian leader, if the same thing had happened to you, and what Putin did say on the 5th of June, that he is apparently authorized now, which is to use Russian weapons, to put them in the hands of America's enemies for them to attack us on our assets. I mean, I think it's just the chances are, it seems to me very high that sometime in the coming number of weeks that an American force somewhere or an American asset somewhere is going to get hit, Americans killed because of weapons provided by the Russians, and there's going to be a big outcry for us to expand and to strike back against Russian targets. And then you have the prospect of escalation.
That's what Zelensky wants.
All too easy.
What Zelensky has been doing.
Breathe.
Yeah. So, I mean, the American people are being played for suckers. And I say this with sympathy, not with disdain. And terrible things are being done in our name. I won't bring up Gaza because that's a totally different subject, but I'm sure many of your audience are following that as well. And the number of people who have died in the Ukrainian war, Russians as well as Ukrainians, it's for a war that didn't have to occur. It was basically because the people in the White House decided for themselves. I don't even think they consulted anybody outside of their little bubble, because these guys live in a bubble, that they could do strategic damage to Russia. I mean, there are people around who know a lot about the Russian industrial base. They should have known that the Russians would be capable of expanding their manufacturing of armaments in a way that would far outstrip what the entire West could do. I'm sure there are people with that knowledge. Nobody asked. These guys live in a bubble. They attacked the Nord Stream pipeline, and nobody consulted with an international economist to ask, could this do more damage to our European allies than it would to Russia? Nobody asked. I mean, it's like these guys sit in a dark room together, coming up with ideas without asking anybody who has real expertise. That's why I believe, almost certainly, in my view, that they had no idea what, if they were involved in knowingly seeing these radars attacked, they had no idea what they were doing. Because I know that they wouldn't have asked the appropriate people in the intelligence community. In fact, they would not even have known how to ask the question. These people,
and when you have this spokesman for the White House, John Kirby, still saying that we have the fiction of trying to go back to the 1991 borders, and that's our objective.
Yes.
I mean, either, like you said, either it's a delusion or it's a lie. But in either way, no matter what the right answer is, the actual answer to that, it's a dangerous situation for Ukraine, for the United States, for the world. It's just, we've taken so much risk. It's just hard for me to fathom.
If he believes what he's saying, he's a total idiot. He knows nothing. If he doesn't believe what he's saying, he's just a liar. I mean, what can I say? He's doing a disservice to the American people because he's trying to manipulate them into believing that there is a possibility here when there is none. The hell's going to freeze over before that happens.
And Ted, I think a lot of that is born out of the fact that they want to be positive for the Ukraine people. They want to give them hope that all is not lost. But I think that is the cruelest thing that can be done. Because listen, I put myself in the position of the Ukrainians. If my country was invaded, I would do everything in my power to get that invader out. I would have fought.
Yeah,
I would have fought tooth and nail.
Too.
But
I would too.
But here's the key thing, and this is where a lot of people disagree with me, and I accept that. But even if it's my country that it happened to, and you can see the physics line up, the math line up, that you can't succeed, and to continue trying is to get more of your countrymen killed, more of your territory lost, and even worse of an ultimate negotiated settlement, then it makes sense. It's logical. It's moral to stop the war as fast as you can to preserve what's still alive. And that is where I think we have made our major miscalculation.
Well, I think we is the right term, and Mr. Biden is the right person to ascribe we to, because the Istanbul Treaty, the treaty that was negotiated in Istanbul, would have basically given them back everything except for Crimea. Putin said he was going to withdraw all his troops. All he wanted in return was they to renounce, to not join NATO, and to take certain other measures to not be a clear and unambiguous military threat to Russia. That's all he wanted. He was willing to allow guarantees of security from other states, including the United States and European states, for Ukrainian security. He was going to pull back all of his forces. And the United States said, oh no, we want to do strategic damage to Russia. And we want to use you Ukrainians to do that strategic damage. And the Ukrainians were, I don't want to say Ukrainian leadership was foolish enough to not, to join the ill-considered, completely unstudied, ill-considered strategy of Mr. Biden and his cohorts in Europe.
Yep.
And the net result is Ukraine has been destroyed. Ukraine no longer exists. 225 million to correct the complete destruction of the electrical system in Ukraine. That's a joke. I mean, you can't, I mean, what is he talking about? 225 million? That does nothing. You couldn't even measure the outcome in terms of correcting the damage that's already been done.
Yeah, and I think that it briefs well here. Sounds impressive on the major media in the United States, and
Yeah, if you don't know anything.
Yeah, because they don't. That's exactly right. But that's what they're counting on, and that's why instead of that, they had this $61 billion package that was passed whatever a month plus ago, and they're going to dribble that out a long time to make it keep sounding like it's something new, like this one, which is part of that, but it's not new. It's just the latest release of it. But that's the whole point, is to make it sound like something new for the American people. Does nothing in reality. But, like those videos, the images that Gary was just showing there of Volchanska, that's just the latest city that's now being turned into rubble because we won't reach a negotiated settlement. And Ukraine will have to bear with that for a generation to come. And who knows how many more cities are yet to fall into that same kind of thing here. But we'll continue to watch this. Professor, thank you so much for coming back on and joining us again today. We always so value having you come over to explain things that, not only do we not get this in the major media, we don't even know there's an issue. And so thanks for bringing this to our attention today.
Let me take this opportunity to say that I obviously put together a big slide presentation, which was not intended to cover this hour, because I just knew we would want to go over specific topics, and your readers should send me emails if they want a copy of that.
Absolutely. And I don't know, Gary, do we have his email address on screen that we can pop up there? I don't remember if we still have that. But how would they find you if we don't have that on there?
All they have to do is send an email to POSTOL, going postal, at mit.edu. And I'll get your message. Please, please, please put in the heading, please send slides about early warning, because it's very hard. I get all these emails coming in. It's overwhelming to me. I have all kinds of things that are happening right now. And I found myself, to my total surprise, the object of getting many emails, some of them not even being threatening.
Some of them.
So,
all right.
So please make it clear what you're asking for in the heading, and I will just drop it in. I won't even bother commenting. I'll just drop the PDF file in for your own use.
Well, very good. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for your willingness to actually share with our viewers there. I know they're very much appreciative. If you're a member of our group here, we're going to have another episode here in 1 hour, a little bit less than an hour. It's a live Q&A huddle for members of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Army. And if you haven't joined up, please go and see that right now. And just look back on our page and you'll see the join button. So you don't want to miss this exclusive information that we have just for our members. We're going to give you some information, some back and forth stuff. And then I'm really looking forward to this. We're going to actually be able to engage with you. So we'll ask you some questions. You'll make some comments. You can ask us questions and we'll reply. Might even be an appearance made by Gary. Who knows? We don't know how special this one will be, but we're going to give you a chance. So please be sure and join. You got to join first, or you won't be able to join in with the video. But come back at 3 o'clock, and we'll give you the special Q&A situation today. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.